afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This will be the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, March 19th. And I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, joined by Mr. Englander and Mr. Bonin for that meeting. And we will also be taking up within that agenda a joint meeting with consideration of item number 1 jointly with the Transportation Committee. And the Transportation Committee is represented today by its chair, Mr. Bonin, and Ms. Martinez. So we'll begin with general public comment. And I have one real name submitted for general public comment. That would be Mr. Eric Previn. So I'd like you to come on up, Mr. Previn, and offer your general public comment. Mr. Herman, you're invited up as well. And if there's anybody else here represented by the various profane names that I assume Mr. Herman submitted, go ahead and come on up as well. Mr. Previn.
Right, it's a little unusual to take the general public comment first. We were expecting the Vision Zero report and some of the other reports, but I will do my best. I know there's a lot of concern about the way forward with Vision Zero, and I looked closely, and we're moving some of the money from street reconstruction into Vision Zero so that it's a little bit more. It was supposed to be 28 and 20, now it's 25 to Vision Zero and 24 to the other. And you know, $3.5 million is labeled for bikes, but much more is for bikes because of the complete streets. And I think it's important, you know, and I was listening to a tweet war, and people are concerned that if we make it too onerous for bicyclists, wearing helmets and getting bike insurance or things like that, they're not going to opt in, and I understand that. But I also am concerned about our ongoing liability and some of the streets that, you know, for example, we paid large payouts to, but we're not really ever earmarked for bicycles, and yet we eat that and kind of have to move forward. I'm thinking of the Godefroy case, obviously. And, you know, I'm open to meaningful conversation about it, but there's 25 items on the agenda tomorrow at City Council where you can't talk about them related to these kinds of Vision Zero transportation things. So I think you have to do a better job of outreaching.
Thank you.
I didn't even get to this.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Herman.
So on item 3, the Los Angeles Community Action Network, you know, they have a problem, and that is that transparency. As you see, they were holding back records, the Los Angeles Police Department. That's why Chief Beck's early retirement is sufficient, because we know that Beatrice is going to clean house. She's not going to take Eric Garcetti's hand and shove it right up where the sun don't shine, because we're tired of it. The public is tired of police corruption, such as the one brought out on item 3, and I hope you pay the attorneys 25% due to your action. And then the last item, 666, Englander, the czar, who discriminates against Armando Herman under 12101 of the ADA and restricts him in public meetings under ADA Section 203, discrimination. Fuck you!
Sit down, Mr. Herman. I'm going to call multiple items next. So I assume you're one of those. So go ahead with your 2 minutes.
Are we done with general comments, sir?
I'll take it later.
It would be real nice if we had a quorum or decorum, you see, calling people's names out of order.
Stick to the agenda. You're on the agenda items now. You have 2 minutes to speak to the agenda items, otherwise you're going to be asked to leave.
Racist segregations of public comment. You see, on item 5, Krikorian and Englander under Kanabi and Allen LLC have challenged to transfer $11 million of funding to the California Department of Healthcare Services for the Los Angeles Fire Department. Should we believe them? No. Why? Because the Los Angeles Police Department only got a 5% raise without discussing their retirement. So who's getting eyeballed, or let me use the intensifier that triggers you? Fuck you. And so then, on case item number 3 again, which is dealing with the Congress DBA Los Angeles Community Action Network. You know, the city is liable for all these cases here because they don't take swift action to remedy and mediate with you all folks on the sidelines. See, and I'll tell you why. See, Paul Krikorian and Kanabi and Allen and Englander under LLC pretend to be good lawyers in good faith of the city, but instead the jackasses, or I should say the correct political word, the morons, are taking advantage of you taxpayers, and they're just paying out millions of dollars, and eventually the deficit ceiling of the city is going to collapse, and we're going to ask for federal dollars to help save the city from its collapse. But see, Spindler is right. When you deal with corruption in a...
Spindler's not on the agenda. Stick to the agenda.
I'm talking about a case, sir. When Wayne Spindler's case takes action in federal law, you will deal with his dealings and the federal magistrate.
Mr. Previn, your multiple items, please, followed by Mr. Watkins. And Mr. Watkins, you can take your minute of general public comment when you do your multiple items as well. Mr. Previn.
Yeah, it's Eric Previn from Studio City. And now we're on the items. So the case that I believe the former speaker was trying to reference was the Congress, or Community Action Network, sued the LAPD because they were not given access to citation records. Mr. Bonin, I believe you remember and it was in 2014, 2015, and there was a big fight. And unfortunately, it took a long time, and I think to the credit of the LA Times and Paul Koretz, who just arrived, we're happy to see him, there was a big article about how egregious that citing was, and how, obviously pointless in a homeless crisis it is to go around citing homeless people. And I know we've subsequently tried to ease off there, although some of us have dug deeper. And, other things that we looked at was, one of the things in the funding for Vision Zero was the signage. How can we adjust the signage properly? And they found that there was a backlog of signage, and that Mr. Englander's group was pointing to the oversized vehicle restrictions all over the place. So here again, in a homeless crisis, nobody wants a motorhome parked in front of their home, and that's understandable, but we have to provide a place. And I think we've fallen short in that regard, and it's really bad. It's very, very bad. Now, jumping back to the Congress lawsuit, the Community Action Network, there was a public record blockage there. Now, when the people inside the City Hall are blocking people from accessing the records to do the advocacy and work necessary to, that will result in solutions, not additional burying of this story over and over again, there's a real problem. And so, you're looking for which kind of oversight would be best for Vision Zero. You have a proposed committee that's transportation oriented. You have the mayor's group is one option, and then there's a third group. And I would simply say that, none of those are going to work unless you make it transparent. And so the best option is probably, and you're all leaning in that direction, the first option that you select, which is the sort of a group of city insiders, but they have to make it open so that the public can be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins. So Mr. Watkins has, let's do the 2 minutes for multiple items and then followed by the 1 minute for general public comment. Go ahead, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. Good afternoon. I support decorum and order in the city council meeting, so thanks. Oh, we're on the topics. I did number 4, not multiple, but I've got 4 in general comment. It was I just wanted to mention something about, I don't know because it's behind closed doors, about a lawsuit about tripping. I just can comment on sidewalks in the city of Los Angeles, and y'all know where I stand with it. I just think we need more budget towards infrastructure and safety. This, in my general comment, I'll present my rough draft for a 50-50 infrastructure safety concept for budget. Just ways that, thanks, behind me, I wonder if they could be quiet so I can deliver my...
Yeah, hold his time, please. Hold his time. And he actually only signed up for 1 item, so, but I'll keep track of that.
Okay.
It's okay. No, you have time, but I want to hold the time.
Thank you.
Because I want to instruct the members of the public who are interrupting your public comment that they need to keep their mouths shut or they will be asked to leave this room. I don't want to hear noises. I don't want to see distraction. Put your puppet down. Put it down. Put it down. If you distract any member of this committee, if you distract the public speakers who are trying to exercise their rights here before this committee, you'll be removed really quickly. Okay, he has another 30 seconds, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there are lawsuits. This is one of them for tripping. I volunteer sidewalk clean until people pay me. I have a property owner who's starting to pay me, so that's good. But I believe we need more money, and I think it might be in the budget for more money for infrastructure and both cleaning and securing our sidewalks. Thanks, Mr. Englander and Mr. Blumenfield, for consideration. I think the money is there. We have to say no to some people that we've been saying yes to for many years. The zoo could be privatized, Mr. Blumenfield. The arts and cultural affairs could be looked at. I think we need all hands on deck for sidewalk improvement.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Watkins. I'm sorry, we had started the timer with 2 minutes, so.
Okay.
But our mistake.
So quickly,
So if you can
general
go to-
comment, thanks.
Wait, just 1 second.
Okay.
Let's go to general public comment next, but I do want to recognize before you begin that Mr. Blumenfield and Mr. Kretz are here, so we have a full contingent of the Budget and Finance Committee as well. So go right ahead with your general public comment.
Thank you, guys. So I will submit to Mr. Williams, just for the record, my rough draft here, and work on it and keep working on it. And thanks for your service in working on this budget. I hope this year it's a really tough budget on infrastructure and safety. As to decorum, thank you. 12B of the Rules of Decorum of City Council is no person in the audience at a council or committee meeting shall engage in conduct that disrupts the orderly conduct of any council or committee meeting, including but not limited to the utterance of loud, threatening, or abusive language, whistling, clapping, stamping of feet, repeated waving of arms, or other disruptive acts. You may have already read that today. I came late. But I take a bus out here. It's not easy, and I appreciate when I come, I'm able to give my 1 minute or 2 minutes, whatever that is, and put in that work so I can go back and clean some sidewalks. Thanks for the decorum. Appreciate it.
We do our best, Mr. Watkins, but as you can see, it's often a challenge. So thank you very much for those comments. Spindler, please. 2 minutes first for multiple items, and then he can go to his general public comment.
Yes, so item 1, we don't like Vision Zero, fuck Vision Zero. It's time to get rid of Vision Zero. It has zero vision, and everybody's falling off their bicycles in these fucked up lanes of traffic. According to your survey by your independent consultant, a very nice, attractive lady, she says you willfully put most of the bike lanes in dangerous conditions on the streets. And Mike Bonin knows this, and so does Mr. Blumenfield, and as such, you have willfully and recklessly endangered the lives of Angelenos who ride bikes. Thank you. Fuck you. Now, number 2, good, we have more lawsuits being settled every day, like number 2. Thank you for suing the city, and I hope you get as much money as possible out of these cocksuckers. Yes, very good. Well, time is going down quick. Let's continue. Number 3, Congress versus the Los Angeles City Council. It's about time that the U.S. Congress sue you. All of your records, everything needs to come out in the open. How many times have you contacted lately the State Bar of California? How many times has Englander, Kanabian, Allen, and Eric Rose contacted the mayor and the city attorney and the State Bar, especially on September the 4th, 2017? Nuri knows, but Nuri won't talk because she's being very smart. And then finally, Holly Brakefield broke her neck. Fucking settle the slip and fall on Holly Brakefield, who broke her neck on number 4. Thank you, and give her $9 million, yes.
1 minute.
So now we go into our general comments. Decorum. Everybody's all concerned about decorum and Rule 12B and all of these things. So, what are we going to do about it? You got judges in one court say something's a threat, and in the federal court they say it's not a threat. Did you know tonight in Herb Wesson's field office you're going to be having a meeting of the Board of Public Works? Did you know my restraining order illegally prohibits me under Civil Codes 52.1 of the Bain Act from attending a public meeting, and your TRO is unconstitutional? You didn't know that. You don't give a fuck. Because one of the things in transportation that's important is I get behind these buses and they're really big in the back. In fact, they're so big, they're as big as Norrie's big ass. Baba Booey, Howard Stern, Howard Stern.
Spindler removed from the meeting for disrupting the meeting, please. In fact, Herman can join him. For those of you who are new to the Budget and Finance Committee, or for that matter, any committee of the City Council, or the City Council, or any commission of the City Council, the Spindler and Herman show has become a regular feature, and we apologize to everyone who's offended by their patently disgusting and offensive comments. So I apologize on behalf of the entire City Council. So that brings us now to item number. Was there anybody else here who wished to speak about multiple items on the agenda? Okay. Was there anybody else here who had wished to offer general public comment who didn't have a chance? Okay. So general public comment is closed, and let's go ahead and take up item number 1.
Item number 1 is a City Administrative Officer report to the 2017-18 Street Reconstruction and Vision Zero program budget. Personnel and Animal Welfare and Public Works and Gang Reduction Committees have waived consideration of this matter.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is David Hirano. I'm with the Office of the CAO. And before you is our second report for the year on the overlapping scope of work between the Street Reconstruction Program and the Vision Zero program as approved in the 17-18 budget and funded from both Measures M and SB1. In our first report that was joint with the CLA in August of 2017, we reported on the distribution of Measure M funds and advised you on that and the initial staffing requirements for both programs. In this report before you today, we are advising on the distribution of SB1 funds, and I'd like to highlight 4 things about the report. The report provides an update on the schedule of the 6 projects and also provides an option for you to add a significant amount of sidewalk repair and stormwater Green Street work to the projects. Then also recommends 4 new positions and related equipment for the Beer Street lighting and provides an update on the revenue changes that we're experiencing in Measure M and SB1. And if you'd like, I can briefly address each one of them, or I could pause there and just take questions. Your choice.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to go into each project unless members want to ask, because I think few of the members represent the areas that are encompassed by some of these projects, so they may have specific questions. But I guess let me just ask the big 30,000-foot question and tee it up for you. This is these recommendations represent a tremendous increase in the budget for these projects. That tremendous increase reflects a number of policy objectives that each standing alone are things that this council has very much wanted to pursue. I assume and hope that by bringing them together in a single package, there are economies of scale that can be realized in pursuing the collective of Vision Zero objectives, sidewalk reconstruction, street reconstruction objectives, the Green Streets objectives, all of those things taken together, there are economies of scale, and I'd like you to talk about that. I guess let's just start with that.
Okay. I may need some help from the city engineer on the economies of scale, but technically when you combine major construction projects like that, you do save money in the bidding process and mobilization, and you do get some efficiencies associated with the scope of the work. Additionally, our office would recommend that you add the sidewalks and Green Street elements because it's an opportunity to also reduce the amount of disruption to the community. So we don't come in and disrupt them once and then come back and disrupt them again for work that we know we have to do. And finally, it's a nice feeling to actually present a well-done, complete street and restored infrastructure as opposed to doing a job that's kind of halfway there. So those are our reasons for the recommendation. As for the efficiencies, I'll let Deputy City Engineer Julie Sauter address those.
Good afternoon, Julie Sauter with the Bureau of Engineering. And exactly as David had outlined, the efficiencies that you gain, obviously very much upfront is the design aspect of it, is when you're looking at your design, you're looking at your roadway and reconstruction, that's the perfect opportunity that you're going to be incorporating any sidewalk work that will require some curb and gutter work along with the sidewalk. Additionally, this is an opportunity when we are doing our infrastructure, this is when you would go in and design when you're looking at other infrastructure that may need realignment or readjustment, whether it be a catch basin or some utilities, so that you can optimize the location of your Green Street infrastructure at the same time that you're doing your design for the reconstruction and your sidewalks. As David had mentioned, one of the biggest efficiencies gained is the disruption to the community. Once you're out there with your crews, whether it be BSS or an alternate contractor, to have everything done at the same time, you're gaining some efficiency in your contracting opportunities and bidding.
Okay. So in order to realize those efficiencies of disruption, it is really important to align the scheduling of that design element. And that it doesn't always happen. I can speak to an example in my own district where my great street on Lancashire was dug up by the DWP to replace a trunk line. DWP finished. We're now ready to go in with the Vision Zero redesign of the street. But Great Streets is not ready to come in yet with the green elements for another year. So that street remains unpaved and in washboard condition for multiple years because those projects were not aligned. So if we're going to go this route, it's really important that all departments get on the same page to ensure that we realize those efficiencies. Otherwise, I'm concerned that we're overly prioritizing some other elements over the urgent need of getting our streets and sidewalks repaired and saving lives. So that's my philosophical observation. But let me go to the chair of the Transportation Committee, Mr. Bonnet.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. I agree with everything you just said. And I agree with the way everything was just framed, that it is important to do everything at the same time, to reduce the disruption to communities. We don't want to present, Dave, as you said, a street that's halfway there. So and so I appreciate that you and the mayor's office have thought to add in the green streets and the sidewalks. That all makes a lot of sense. What I seem to be missing, and maybe it's in here and I'm not getting it, is it seems to me that the permanent, meaning concrete, literally concrete, not linguistically concrete, elements of Vision Zero are absent here. And by that I specifically mean the curb extensions on Reseda and Avalon and the protected bike lane on Avalon. So can you explain why we've added everything else in to get to a complete street, but we've not left this out?
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask my colleagues from the Department of Transportation to come to the table and answer that. That is a decision that is being made by them and not our office.
Good afternoon. I'm Nader Asmar from the Department of Transportation. The way that I would describe it is that we have evolved our cost estimating since the beginning in June when we had one cost estimate, and then every month we seem to develop a different cost estimate that improved as the project matured, and we came up with a better cost estimate as we went on. But when October came, when the first report came out, those elements were not identified in concrete yet, but subsequently they were, so we sort of want to try to get them into the scope if we can, but they so far have not been able to come into this report.
So, okay, but you made it seem like it was their decision not to include them.
Our office is not making any decisions on the content of the Vision Zero improvements or the number of Vision Zero improvements. We're just dealing with the budget as it was identified by the mayor and council last year. So those were not safety advocates.
In the August joint report from CLA and CAO, it specifically called out the permanent Vision Zero improvements, including curb extensions, median, safe harbors. So I'm just trying to figure out why they're not in here.
You know, back then, that was the scope of work that we had worked on with DOT and engineering in terms of identifying what the project was. It's my sense that DOT has since refined their scope, and I don't know exactly what they're estimating for each one of the projects, but Nader, do you know?
I can give a better estimate now if you'd like that includes curb extensions on those streets.
Sure.
So if we look at a number of curb extensions for Avalon and Reseda specifically and use the methodology that BOE uses where they, after construction costs, they add contingency and delivery. We also are estimating curb extensions at $150,000 each based on our discussions with BOE as far as what their experience is. And I feel like $150,000 might be a little on the high end, but we should budget accordingly based on what we think BOE has provided. It comes up to be an additional about $12.3 million just to get at $150,000 each on those two streets based on what we see. What we were proposing was to have curb extensions at all the signalized intersections along those corridors on the near side. And there's benefits to having curb extensions, safety benefits. Studies have shown that they have a crash reduction factor of 30% at those locations. And they do have the effect of calming traffic along that entire corridor. So we do see safety benefits in including them now. And the estimate that we came up with based on $150,000 a piece is about an additional $12.3 million.
Which is equivalent to the other things that were added. So let me just say to advance Mr. Hirano's point about the importance of doing everything all at once, is if we were to come back and do the curb extensions later, and in some cases, and Mr. Blumenfield can certainly speak for his own district, but I know that on Avalon, the council office there has worked very hard on that project and wants the curb extensions. If they were to be added in later, you've got to really do a lot of redesign, even about the drainage, because the slope impacts the drainage on the street. It's not just simply putting in a curb extension. You've got to redo a lot of what you would have just been doing. Plus, my understanding is that under the current plan, we'd be putting in ADA ramps, which then you have to redo because you've moved the curb out. So you're doing a lot of work later to put these in later. So I'd frankly like to see us include these so that we're actually doing the whole street. I don't know that this is a model that is scalable for the rest of the city, but it's the first ones we're doing, and we should see what it takes to do a real complete street, and then we can sort of adjust from there. The other question I wanted to ask was about the green streets and how much detail we've gone into on them. We don't know exactly which pieces of sidewalk are going to get pulled up or replaced versus just patched, right?
We do, initially, we've done an initial assessment of the worst sidewalks in all of the corridors, so we do have a very good preliminary assessment of the sidewalk repair. And
I'm asking about the sidewalk repair in relation to the permeable elements in the green streets. Do we yet know that they are directly going to overlap, or might we have to replace more sidewalk to put more permeable subsurface in.
Right, and so what we're doing right now is working with the Bureau of Sanitation in identifying where is the good opportunities, the best opportunities to overlay where the green infrastructure will have the best water recapture, and how closely they are in alignment or in proximity to the sidewalks and the curb extensions that we have to repair. And so as we get further down, in the design element, we can, refine the opportunities for those green infrastructure.
Which you might need to do because you might have a really buckled sidewalk at one point, but you want to have the green feature for a longer stretch, and you may have to replace more sidewalk.
Right,
Presumably.
and there are different types of green infrastructure that we can implement depending on the nature of the, the area.
And what are we doing? I understand the design features you've talked about that make it green. I know that when I hear green, when a lot of my constituents hear green, they think not just about something that treats the stormwater, but also about the tree canopy, which is particularly important in really hot areas, South LA and the Valley. Are we incorporating a concern for the urban forest as we do this?
Yeah, what we found in the sidewalk repair program, obviously, is that majority of the damaged sidewalk is due to trees. And so when we do go and replace the sidewalk and repair them, our cost already incorporates the replacement of the trees. If they cannot be preserved, then we are, following the same city policy, which is a 2-to-1 replacement of the trees. And so that addresses, how we are addressing the tree, street tree and urban canopy. When possible, we will preserve, and if we are not able to, then we will use the city policy of the 2-to-1 replacement. And that's already built into our sidewalk replacement number that's presented here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we're really going for complete streets, and if these are going to be like the first couple models, right? If 2-to-1 is sort of our bare minimum, some of the areas may have not had sufficient canopy in the first place. So if we're going to be doing a complete street, we may want to put in 4-to-1, or there may not be one to replace in the first place, and we want to put some in. So I want to make sure we're thinking about that too.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for now.
Mr. Bloomfield?
How do the sidewalks that we're adding in fit in with the Willits requirement? Do they count?
I think it would be our intent to have that conversation with the city attorney and the plaintiffs, but I don't know that we have a clear answer on that yet.
I mean, I would think they should, but okay, you can save that conversation. And then you were talking a little bit about some of the green elements. I wanted to dig a little deeper. We're talking about what, like French drains, other kinds of things. Well, what are the other elements that would be part of the?
One of the things we're looking at is one of the things that we are looking at is using our standard plans. We want to be able, since this is a new program and we're really want to be aggressive with our schedule, we are looking to things that have already been tested. So one of the couple of the items that come to mind are our bioswales. We have a standard plan for bioswales that are used in the city, as well as dry wells. And so depending on the hydrology of the particular street and the area and the space availability, we have a few of these different type of elements that we can draw upon our toolbox as far as a green infrastructure that would be best suited for that particular corridor. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I saw some of the answers in here. I just wasn't sure how deep it goes. And then I guess I have another sort of financial question. So the increased costs, a big chunk of it is just due to adding in all these new and needed elements. But there was also another piece that was sort of contingency that was added in that I wasn't sure why wasn't there the first time.
So in our first report, I think there may have been a communication issue between our office and the city engineer. The first report reflected approximately $37 million as the value of the project, when in fact the city engineer was thinking it was $50 million, and that included contingency, it included design and other elements that we had thought were in that first $36 million estimate. So the estimate you're looking at now, the $50 million estimate, is really what the original project cost was.
So there was an extra 14 million that it's not due to all these changes, but just sort of.
It's the difference between the, the actual construction costs, which is the $36 million that was reported, and the additional delivery costs.
Includes design, includes contingency and construction management, that kind of thing.
Right. There's part of it was the added elements, and then part of it was a miscommunication or something.
Correct. And so I think the difference between 36 million and the 50 million was the miscommunication, and that included the contingency, the design, things like construction management. And then what the report reflects before you is the option to add $25 million for sidewalk repair and additional $4.8 million for the Green Street elements.
Okay. And the design includes all the sidewalks, the curb extensions, the green infrastructure.
Yes. With the exception is not the concrete curb extension, but right now what it reflects is the curb extension with painting and I guess what we call them interim bollards.
Interim.
And you may have answered this already, but did you give us the number for the total? I think that's what you were telling us. If we did add those other pieces in, the curb extensions and that are not included? That's what I think you were saying before, and I was trying to follow it on. I couldn't follow it when you were saying, but that's.
Yeah, the Vision Zero cost estimate that's in the report right now does not include the concrete curb extensions on Avalon and Reseda.
Okay. But we will move forward with those as well. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What percentage of the city's Measure M return funds are devoted to Vision Zero?
Percentage? I'd have to get back to you on that. We have, sorry, I wasn't prepared for that one. I'll have to get back to you on that, sir.
Okay. Well, what's the reason that Measure M and SB1 revenues are falling behind the estimates in the city budget?
The Measure M estimates, we used, for last year's budget, we used the current Metro estimate, which was for a full year's worth of revenue to be about $56 million. And the Metro told us that we wouldn't start receiving revenue until October. So we basically used 9 months worth in the budget, which is $42 million. Since then, we adopted our budget, then Metro went back and they revised their estimate down, and we've had additional conversations with them, and revenue just seems to be coming in at a little bit lower level. I'm not sure we know exactly why. Metro seems to think it's part of the ramp up, and I'm not sure if we will eventually catch up at this point, but it appears clear that during 17-18, we're going to be down about $5 million off of our estimate. So in the mid-year report that was before you a week or so ago, we made some adjustments down on the appropriations side to try and offset that, and we're continuing to look for ways to continue to bring the budget back into alignment before the end of the year. On SB1 revenues are very difficult to calculate. They're very complex, and there's really only one entity in the state that's really successfully tried to do so, and it's California City Finance. We used their estimate in the budget, and they came back with a clarification, 2 clarifications in January. One, they revised their estimate downward by about $451,000, and then they came back and said that one of the revenue items that they had flagged as SB1 really should have been marked for gas tax, and that we should be putting the money into the gas tax fund and expanding it according to those rules and regulations. So we had to make that adjustment as well. So that explains about a $5 million difference in SB1. It's important to note that the city is still projected to get the vast majority of the SB1 monies. The only real decline in SB1 monies is the $451,000. It's just the other $4.5 million are going to a different fund.
So on the Measure M, long-term, we're not necessarily expecting that this will be a long-term problem. That's something that might correct.
In Metro's projections last year, they had some very aggressive growth factors going out into the future. My understanding is they have revised those downward to something that we're much more comfortable with. So I think as we look into 1819 and 1920, there will still be a growth in Measure M revenues from the current year. Just the growth will occur at a level below what we were expecting at this time last year.
Okay. And why is the design phase as far behind schedule as it is?
When you start new programs, there's always some glitches and some bumps along the way. And, part of that has to do with estimates for time and costs. But this year we also had some issues with the availability of money. The initial dose of money that came in October, but we weren't actually ready with the trust fund ordinance and hadn't set that mechanism up to allow the departments to actually spend the money, and that wasn't ready till Christmas. So departments weren't, while they could get ready, they actually weren't allowed to spend the money until after Christmas. So we got a little bit of a late start, but everyone's working really hard at trying to move forward as quickly as possible.
Okay, and I know we're considering whether or not to establish an oversight body that isn't open to the public. Any reason why we would do that?
We made some recommendations in our last report. The recommendations from the CAO and CLA were not to have an oversight body that wasn't open to the public, but to establish one that was. I think it was the wisdom of the council at the time to not adopt that and to ask for us to look at other options as well. So I think that's really up to you to decide how you'd like to handle it.
Was there a justification for considering not having it open to the public?
None that was given on the record, sir. Just a desire for additional options as far as I could tell.
Okay, and I know the scope of the work for the 3 complete street projects is set to be contracted out. Is there a reason why these have to be contracted out, or could the work not be performed by city employees?
We did, in our last report, we did recommend a substantial number of full-time employees for the Bureau of Street Services. I think it was 42 or 44. And those employees are intended to help build some of these streets. The plan is for them to build at least 2, if not 3 of the 6 streets, and then the remainder to be contracted out. And if you'd like, Julie can maybe describe why she recommended contracting out the other 3.
For some of these streets that we have in this program, they just have a lot of, they're more conducive for bidding out, more interaction. Some of the different scopes of work that we're looking at, more complex green infrastructure opportunities that would be best suited for contracting out, having more availability with the different types of staff skill sets that we have. And this is something that we've worked with Bureau of Street Services in identifying, looking at the 6 corridors, looking at the types of work that needed to be done. And it was along with their recommendation that we start with these 3 streets with Bureau of Street Services. I think as we go on in this multi-year program and we're able to build up our staff, our city staff, that we can relook at shifting more of the work between city forces and contracting out. But for the first year out, with just the amount of work that we need to get done in the first year and the hiring that we have to do and some of the actual work that needs to be done, this was best suited to have this kind of a 3-and-3 split for now.
And the ones done by city employees, could any of those employ targeted local hire employees like maintenance assistant or maintenance laborer categories?
Let me see if there's someone from Street Services here who can answer. Yeah.
Hello, Stephanie Clement, Street Services. We are hiring 6 out of the 44 through targeted local hiring for maintenance laborers and for maintenance and construction helpers.
Well, that's at least something. We encourage you all to do more, but that's a good start at least.
Yeah, for the other classifications, we could not hire through that program. Only those.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to know, how does this reallocation affect how we plan for next year's program?
Sorry, which reallocation are you talking about? The redirection of funds that we proposed in here?
Yes, that's what we're
Okay.
talking about.
All the money for construction is really going to hit us in 1819. So the vast bulk of the project cost is going to be in 1819, 1920. If we did not redirect funds now, we wouldn't be spending them. There will be more funds available next year, and in Measure M and SB1. So I think we would expect that the mayor and council would appropriate sufficient funds from those new monies to construct the remainder of these streets in 1819 and 1920.
So, which brings me to my second question. So we overestimated our receipts of Measure M and SB1. So do we have any idea if this is going to be an ongoing issue, or is it just a monetary delay? You began to answer it earlier. You began to answer it, but I wanted to get more clarification.
It's a really good question. I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah.
We hope that it's just a one-time
So this is
issue.
why I'm asking, how does this affect how we estimate next year's fund, or how we plan for next year's program, I should say?
Right, and I think we have a higher degree of confidence in revenue estimates for Measure M than we do for SB1. SB1 is much more complex of a mechanism than Measure M is, and it's also a statewide fund, so it becomes much harder to project. So I think hopefully we'll get better at that over time, and we'll have some.
Well, we need to get better at
record.
that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we shouldn't hope. We need to get better at these estimates.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
The other thing, I know you mentioned that these figures account for everything design and construction contingency. I believe you said that. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we will not be having another request for additional authorization next year then?
Not for these 6 corridors.
So this is it?
Yes.
And then my last question, Mr. Chair, is who is going to be responsible for the maintenance of the green street elements? Is this going to be a future obligation of sanitation? Because today we're only talking about design and construction. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who's going to be ultimately responsible for the maintenance?
It would be sanitation.
Do they know that?
I hope so. They were part of the plan for this.
All right. And there's been monies allocated towards that maintenance?
Yeah, there's
as well?
discussions going on and looking at alternate funding sources that would allow for the future maintenance of the green infrastructure. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but there's been no money allocated towards it yet. That's something
Which
that would be
is going to be
needed.
problematic.
Yeah, it's something that would be needed after the construction of those elements. And so we're talking about late 1819 or 1920s when we'll need that money. So we have a little bit of time to figure that out.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Englander?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Kokorian and Chairman Bonin on this. I think I would actually focus a little bit and have a discussion on one of the things Councilwoman Martinez actually brought up, and that's really looking at the fund transfer. Okay, so the history, as I recall on this, and during the last budget deliberations and discussions in April and in May, were, and that was one of the deepest discussions we had during the entire budget process last year, was where to divide some of these funds into Vision Zero versus reconstruction, and then also trying to get the most out of Vision Zero projects on high injury networks that also needed to be reconstructed and met all of those objectives, right? So sort of 3 different categories, and with that, it was a policy call at that point that the council ultimately made and the mayor signed to say this is what we can do and this is what we want to do. But it turns out we couldn't. And so where we're at today is moving an additional, at a minimum, $4.5 million. It looks like it's actually all in close to $9 out of reconstruction to fund what had a shortfall in some of the Vision Zero projects because there were certain elements like contingency and other costs and engineering not included in the original estimates. Just trying to follow this, right?
I'm trying, yes.
Okay. Well,
I think,
walk me through, actually correct that history, if you will, for a moment so we can have the discussion.
okay, I think the thing I would offer is that we haven't discovered that we can't do that. We can do the projects. It's just
I'm talking about
longer to spend the money.
I'm talking about the reconstruction, not the Vision Zero projects, just focused on the reconstruction, because that's where the money's proposed to be moved. I mean, our vote today is simply to transfer the money. That's
Right.
it. That's what's before us.
And it's
for
just
the
a
most
matter
part.
of timing. The money isn't going to be spent this year. But
So that's what I want to get into, the money not being spent this year. So this is the history that I've had, having now been here for a while, is that we often get into funding, and let's just talk about street reconstruction for a moment, sidewalks and streets, and I'll sort of lump those together, streets and sidewalks. It's not about, for me, and I think it's important to say this as well, it's not for me just about vehicles. It's all mobility. It's all access to our streets and infrastructure. And that includes cycling, folks that are riding on buses, and the condition of what the buses do to streets, as well as to the riders themselves, and traffic, and improving, even reconstructing streets that have cycling lanes. Today, right after you walk out the door on this agenda, we actually have what's being asked of us of a $3 million payout for a slip and fall on a sidewalk. $3 million. These are regularly agenda discussions that we have every Monday. And so we made a call, although I don't even know that it was a unanimous decision at that point, but it was a deep discussion about dollars we're going to spend on great streets, green streets, complete streets, Vision Zero streets, and reconstruction. Since we can't complete this fiscal year on the reconstruction side, we're looking at that being, I won't call it a surplus, but money we don't have the ability to spend because there's not enough time left in the fiscal year to do so. This is the pattern I see, and where I see this is it's happening because let's assume then next year we get into the same position, say, no, let's fund reconstruction of more streets and sidewalks. This stop, go mentality where there's some money left and we take it out and we fund other projects, critically important projects. I'm a proponent of these complete streets, and they're so important, and that's why we did move forward in funding many of these. But when we start and stop reconstruction, you lose a critical momentum that costs us dearly. 4 years ago, I really did an analysis on SOS LA and working with you all and some of my colleagues on the council.
What is that?
We are opening a dentist office across the hall. Yeah, if you guys think this is painful, go across the hall.
Like a drone.
So we did an analysis on our backlog on reconstruction, and not including sidewalks. We were at $1 billion to $1.5 billion 4 years ago. We were at, not including sidewalks, we were at $1.5 billion just on the reconstruction of just the street portion of it. And today that number's ballooned to about $4 billion is about where we're at. Every year it goes up exponentially because of labor costs, material, other requirements. And so when we do this start-stop every single year, and we were able to fund more into reconstruction, but then we pull it back because we can't get it done and put it into other projects or the general fund as we did last year. I think we had $42 million left in reconstruction dollars that went back into the general fund at the end of the budget because, again, we didn't have enough time for working with BOE, staffing up, putting together our engineering plans on each street for reconstruction, and so there's not enough time to do that. We're about to do that again right now, where we don't have enough time, so let's take the money because we can't spend it all in a calendar year. And unfortunately, since we fund only 1 year at a time, and we have a 1-year budget instead of a 10-year budget or a 5-year budget, we keep doing this. But what it does on the back end, on the labor side, on the city side, is it stops everybody in their tracks where we have to refocus on projects that we can get done this year. We don't even have time to staff up and look at it from a long-term perspective where we've got to, as Mr. Corrett said, contract out. This is work we're going to be doing forever, where we can actually look at this in the long-term plan and say, this is really a policy decision. Do we keep the momentum going and say, no, we're not going to stop just because the calendar rolls over to July 1st and it's a new fiscal year. Keep the money in place, keep going, get more streets reconstructed because it's all about mobility. Keep what we've been on track for, Vision Zero, and great streets and everything as well. And if we need more money in those cases, don't take it all away from the other side of the equation of reconstruction, because now we've stopped that again. And then when we run into the next year, which we're about to, we're starting the budget process soon, those costs are going to go up and the backlog gets further. It's the same thing on our sign shops. It's the same thing on every side of city services where we keep transferring money because we can't get it done, but then we transfer it back because of a policy decision. Meanwhile, we're paying out millions of dollars in accidents and slip and falls, and the backlog keeps growing and the cost keeps getting higher. To me, the argument would be, if we fund and have the policy decision during the budget, because the budget is nothing more than numbers on a page, but it's policy. It's moving forward to say, what are we going to focus on getting done, but not just this year. So if we're not getting it done this year, saying, oh, we can't get it all done this year, because it took months to get staffing in place and start engineering for the reconstruction that we funded, and then we get to this part of the year usually and say, oh, we can't get it all done now because we didn't have all the plans in place. It was too short of a time frame. So let's stop what we're doing. Let's move that money into other projects that need it, and then we'll revisit this at budget time. And then, by the way, we're in the same boat next year. So for me, I'm not there, because I see this cycle, and I've seen it for too many years. And it's not, let me just be honest, it's not our city staff, and it's not the council, it's the system. We look at this in 1-year cycles, and we get in a crunch and say, we got a lot of other priorities, and we can't get this done anyway, so let's move it towards our other, and they're critical priorities. But what we've done is we've damaged it even worse on the back end. And now, next year, we're going to be looking at a $5 billion backlog, and then a $6 billion backlog. And we keep the cycle going because we can't keep hiring because they don't have the funding now. We've just taken away that funding for hiring and engineering those streets. Let's keep that going. So colleagues, anyway, it's a very difficult, for me, much more difficult than simply looking at it saying, we just don't have enough time in this fiscal year, so let's move these funds. I think it's more than that.
Councilmember, may I? I hear you. I think you're absolutely right. It's important for us to have a systemic way to address our deferred maintenance and catch up on our backlog. And it's really important to maintain momentum in these programs that we're starting. And you're absolutely right on those points. I think one of the things I would like to point out to you is the report before you and the recommendations before you, even though they involve moving money from one program into other programs or projects, doesn't contemplate a stop in any of the work that's currently going on for either Vision Zero or the street reconstruction program. It actually prioritizes maintaining that work moving forward and getting ready to break ground by even funding, providing funding for street services crews, and just kind of continuing to get to that point where we can hopefully take advantage of the momentum.
But what we do is we stop the schedules. And once you stop those schedules, particularly with BOE, you can't restart them on a dime. And that's what takes months and months and months to start up again. And they can only do their scheduling based on funding. and looking at, well, they'll have to just look at from a fresh set of eyes after we get through next year's budget and approve it to what their funding is, and then it takes, again, months to get those schedules. So you just lose and break that momentum, and we can never catch up. We can never even complete what we have ever funded. There's no way to get there when we keep doing this. It's not possible.
Well, as you know, we're very supportive of all the things you want to do in that way, and we'd love to sit down and talk with you and see if there's a way to figure out how to improve this and how to change this process. We definitely agree with you that
I think the only way is to keep schedules going, and if there are not enough funds, 100% of funds, to actually get the work done, you leave enough funds in for hiring and BOE and scheduling and to make sure that when we hit that next July 1st, the work keeps going. There's not a pause between March and July, and then after July passes, then they can start hiring again. It's that gap every year that kills us. And it's created a situation, and again, it's by design. That's how we operate as a city, but it's also one of our biggest failures, quite frankly. It's why we're not hiring and we contract out for these services. It's why the backlog keeps growing. We have to keep it going. And if there's not enough funds to complete it, we can't just take all of those funds and move it to very important and other priority projects, certainly. We have to look at what are the critical elements we have to keep in place to keep that going. And maybe it's getting BOE and street services on the same page to report back to say, okay, while you can't get that all done, let's not take all that money. What's that sweet spot to say keep going, keep hiring, knowing that we're going to guarantee you next year's funding that you're going to do? See, we don't do that either because we only do one-year funding. It's impossible. It's quite frankly just literally impossible for a general manager to program for a full fiscal year of what we're giving them, and then we pull it back in March. And it takes them, and we know the hiring process in LA. It's incredibly complicated. So when we give them more money and tell them we want more projects done, that's months for them to just get staff on board. And then they can't get the projects done, so we take the funds back right before we close out the budget, and they have to stop everything. And so anyway, that cycle, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to break that cycle. And for me, it's not transferring all the funds out of reconstruction into even what I consider critically important priority projects, even in my own district.
Well, we definitely agree with you on the momentum, so if you would like, we're more than willing to work with you on a solution. I don't know what that would be right now either.
Neither do I, but we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right. Thank you for letting
Thank you.
me vent.
Points well taken. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I'm actually really excited at where this discussion is going, and I couldn't agree more. And I think perhaps the logical conclusion is to find certain categories of infrastructure and fund them year over year rather than a year at a time. So you have $5 million at the end of the year, you just carry it over, you keep on working on your projects, and the next year it's funded as you would fund it, but you have the extra millions of dollars and you don't have to start and stop. And you just have to do your budgeting a little differently. So it's not a source of funding for other things, but it's more predictable, it's more efficient, and we actually get those categories of infrastructure done. So I think that's a great place to be looking, and look forward to working with Mr. Englander and you and others to figure out a better way to do this in the future.
Okay. Mr.
One
Bonner.
point, I sort of agree with the chorus on the need for better coordination, multi-year budgeting. Just a quick note on the money that's being transferred. It's classified in Attachment B as Vision Zero, although the bulk of it is sidewalk repair and the large asphalt repairs for the bike lanes and the associated costs. The other thing I just want to point out is a lot of the numbers we're talking about for the costs, they're a little ephemeral because until they get deep into the design, we really don't know how much the sidewalk cost is going to be, how much the curb extension cost are going to be, and how much we save by doing the things together. The design is going to be the key.
And I guess there's another wrinkle on the money, which is if some of this money is coming from state and from other measures, if we don't reallocate it in the right way, do we risk losing some of it?
Correct. And that's just one of the rules. There are other rules that.
I mean, but that's the other thing to balance in this equation is that yes, we're all on the same page as everybody who's talked today on this issue, but also I've seen us lose federal money and state money in the past because we just didn't time it right. So I don't want to risk. I don't want to risk sort of rolling things over or working that process and not reallocating when it puts money in jeopardy. I'd rather spend a little bit more and not lose it. But that's the tricky part.
Yeah, and you also run the risk of defeating the very point that we're trying to accomplish here, which is reduction on the impacts to our constituents as well when those schedules get stretched out and people have to wait years instead of months to get a project completed. So, okay. So,
if I
yeah,
could,
Mr. England.
what I'm going to do on this, since we don't have an abstention policy, is I support this in moving forward since we've had the discussion, but I don't want the discussions to stop there, is symbolically just as a no vote, because I support the projects. In fact, one of them's in my own district. And maybe I'll change that just to be balanced when it comes to council. But I want to just make the statement on the record with that no vote, not that I'm not supportive at all, but that we really do need to change the process. It's so important that we continue to come back here every FSR, every during the annual budget, and there's always money left on the table because we don't have our timelines and schedules to meet how much we funded. And we got to figure out a way, got to make it a priority to figure out how to stop doing that. And I'm so open to ideas on that. And maybe it's talking to getting our GMs in the room, BOE and street services, and figuring that out. What do they need to keep going? And what are the critical protected dollars to make sure schedules and engineering is always done to whatever we're going to fund, no matter what, knowing, and they have to think, max funding to maintain those. And I think it's a discussion that's just well overdue. So I'll vote no only for that reason.
I'd note, though, Mr. Englander, that today's recommendations actually are a step in the direction you're seeking to go in, because by using some of the funds to fund the design of the stuff, we're actually in a better position to start earlier in the new fiscal year than we would be otherwise.
And that's where I'm torn. You're right on those projects,
yeah.
But we're taking it out of reconstruction and out of that. That's the issue.
Yeah.
We got to do both. Right.
Okay. Really good discussion. I'd like
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I do also have to offer one correction as well, a technical correction to attachment A of our report. I think you have it on your desk there. I inadvertently left one line in from a prior version, so that attachment is on your desk, removes that, and makes everything
this
balanced.
item number 1 attachment. Okay.
So giving that to the clerk, and with your permission, we'd like to substitute that in the report.
Great. So couple of thoughts. My thoughts. I think, we have to expedite these projects, move forward, and get on with the next projects after these. So I don't want to slow anything up in moving forward on these projects and in initiating life-saving improvements. At the same time, I'm not ready to buy a pig in a poke and say, let's just vastly expand the scope of these projects to add in these Green Street and other elements, because, as Mr. Bonner points out, the budgeting on those is was ephemeral the word you used? Yeah, I would say that's a soft word for what it is. I mean, it's almost arbitrary, really, at this point, especially when we're trying to get, for example, explanations about curb extensions and things like that, which are fairly obvious and desired things to get done, and we don't have that before us. So I'm not prepared to, I want to look the gift horse in the mouth, I guess, if I can bring another metaphor into that. So what I would recommend is that we move forward. I'd suggest that we move forward with recommendations 1 through 5 in the report. But as to recommendation number 6, I'd ask that we instruct the city engineer to include sidewalk repair and Green Street stormwater compliance elements in the designs for the first 6 complete street projects, and then report back to council with the final project budgets, working with the council offices of the districts that include each of those projects to maximize the amount of work performed while keeping costs within the following budget for each project. And these are essentially the budgets that you have laid out in your attachment. For Avalon, $17.5 million. For Main Street South, $13.9 million. For Reseda, $17.3 million. For Roscoe, $8.6 million. For Temple, $9.2 million. For Venice East, $13.6 million. So maintain those budgets. What the design elements will produce in terms of a final budget, regardless of what they produce, you have to stay within those limits for implementation, working with the council offices to determine the best way to spend those budgets after we get the budgets for those designs.
Mr. Chair,
yeah.
that would exclude the concrete elements then, right?
Wouldn't exclude anything. It would be up to the council offices. So if the council office wants to recommend spending some of that budget on those elements rather than others, that would be up to the council office working with staff within the confines of the budget.
But they're not being asked to design, so they won't actually know what the concrete element costs are.
Okay, fair point, because that was not included. Yeah, so if you want to include that in there, I consider that very friendly.
Okay, and then the council office could then presumably come back if they want to get the funding for the additional element, be it the Green Street or the concrete.
Right.
So we will be designing for those elements
Yeah.
and then working within that budget for that particular corridor and looking at if that is feasible.
Exactly.
Additional curb extension.
Exactly. Now,
Agreed.
recommendation number 7 would be to instruct the CAO, city engineer, Department of Transportation, and Bureau of Street Services not to implement any phase of each of these projects if the cost of that phase is significantly higher than the projected budget, and the council has not already approved a new budget for the project. So if it's the desire of the council office and it's the desire of staff to add elements that go beyond, significantly beyond these numbers, then that would require further approval from the council before implementation begins. I just want to make sure we're not giving a green light to things when the budget is continuing to increase and the scope is continuing to increase without further check-in by this council.
And just on that, I just want to make sure they understand there's not, on your part, we're not asking for a preference for any of those things. Design for all and let the council office decide. The wrinkle in that is that, if you do all of them together, some costs, the shared costs, will go down. Whereas if you take a piece out, it's not like you're just taking that exact price out. Because if you do the curb extensions and the ADA ramps at the same time, some of those costs overlap.
Sure, but that's going to have to be adjusted within the scope of the budget. And that's going to be a matter of preference. One council office might feel very differently than another about what should be prioritized within that budget. So, so that would be my recommendation. Is there any, Mr. Bloomfield, good? Everybody good with that? Okay, so.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Since we're having 2 committees, we would need to take a voice vote for each committee.
Okay, very good. Well, let's start with budget and finance. So you want to just call the roll then?
Sure. Councilmember Krikorian?
Aye.
Councilmember Englander?
No.
Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfield?
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin?
Aye.
And for the Transportation Committee, Councilmember Bonin?
You've had a little time to think about it now. Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Koretz?
Well, I could be schizophrenic and vote no, but I'll vote aye.
All right. Thank you very much. So it'll be the action of both committees then to recommend as I indicated. So thank you all very much. Excellent discussion. Thank you for your work on this. And that completes, I'm sorry? We completed public comment on item number 1. So we'll go next then to, there was a member of the public who wanted to offer general public comment, which I'd like to invite up. Was that you, ma'am, who missed the opportunity earlier? Yeah, come on up. So.
I'm sorry, I got a little confused.
It's quite all right. This has been a little bit of a confusing meeting. It's a joint meeting and the spectacle, I know.
Yeah, but
welcome to our world.
Thank you. I appreciate all your comments today. I'm here to speak up for public drinking fountains on city streets. As an infrastructure investment, it's an important something that I hope the council considers. As you know, the mayor supported Tap Water Day. We're going on our 4th year, and LADWP has installed roughly like 20 fountains, and I believe that there's going to be a continuing commitment from them to install more. So I find that this is a great opportunity for the city to prioritize fountains and to work with LADWP and other rec and parks to get an inventory and to see how this important drinking fountain can promote water appreciation for the city members, and reduce plastic and do a lot, many benefits. So it's one of those priorities that I hope the Finance, Budget, and Transportation Committee considers and when they make their budgets in the future.
Terrific.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry. This has been a little bit. Was there anyone here who wished to speak on item number 1 who didn't have a chance to earlier?
A bunch of them just left. Yeah, we had about 8 people who wanted to speak on it.
Okay. My apologies. Would you like to speak on it still? Okay, come on up. So I'm going to open the matter up for reconsideration. My apologies.
Thank you, Councilmember Corcoran. Yeah, we had allies from AARP, from LEARN, LACBC, Los Angeles Walks are still here, and they might want to speak. Great, Amelia and Lindsay. My name is Jessica Meany. I'm from Investing in Place. We've been tracking this item for a really long time. We believe budgets are a reflection of our values, and we think this is a tremendous opportunity to actually do green, complete streets, cool, complete streets here in LA. And what's really tricky when we can't see the full budget to understand what we're really supporting. And so particularly Councilmember Martinez has been such an ally for us on including sidewalks with our Tripping Point conferences. We hear from so many constituents that sidewalks matter. And I heard a lot of questions about the source of funding. I just want to really keep it real that SB1 is threatened, and many people would like to repeal it, and this scale of investment allows us to do a tremendous pilot project to showcase what the City of LA can do. The challenge with our sidewalk repair program is it's in little bits all across the cities, and none of our citizens and our community members can see how great it is. I don't know why we're nickel and diming on this when we really could be doing urban tree canopy that provides shade and fixing our sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amelia Crowder with Los Angeles Walks. As you can imagine, we're very excited that sidewalks are included in this complete streets, in these projects. We think of these projects as surgery, and you're doing the whole surgery, like muscle, bone, tissue, skin, everything, and that's terrific to have that included. One concern is the loss of shade on city streets. So we work a lot with seniors, and they really need a full tree canopy, as do most people walking, to get the health benefits of that full tree canopy. We're afraid that even with the 2-to-1 replacement, if it's not a full-grown tree, you won't see benefits for years and years, particularly in neighborhoods that are already really low on trees and on a full canopy. The other thing is that grown trees provide a psychological kind of impulse to slow down on streets. So as we're putting in these safety measures, we're losing out on the benefits that a lined tree-lined street provides. The second one is a little bit more in the weeds. It's a concern around project management and project delivery. So LA Walks was, oh shoot, sorry.
Next time.
You can finish the sentence if you'd
Well,
like.
so we were involved in the public education, the community engagement from the round one of these projects, and we would just really, really encourage city council members, transportation department, BSS, any of the public works departments to have really strong communication with the community-based organizations that are out doing the public engagement.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay with LA County Bicycle Coalition. LACBC is encouraged by many of the recommendations in the CAO's report. We're pleased at the inclusion of funding for repairs on bike lanes across the city, as well as the addition of sidewalk repair and grade streets element into the 6 projects. However, we know that this isn't enough to make a real impact on this public health crisis. As the city moves to develop a more coordinated and efficient approach to project delivery, it should integrate funding for community engagement into budgets such as this. We get that implementation is a challenge, but that should point to the need for greater resources around community engagement and education. Finally, we encourage the city to overall be more transparent around the process for producing these types of budgets, including the input provided by various departments. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And
Thank
again, I
you.
apologize for that. Thanks for calling it to my attention. A little confusing this morning. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, if I could add something based on what was just brought up. I'd again encourage us as we go forward with our continuing sidewalk program to be more willing to cut roots rather than to remove trees, more willing to do meandering sidewalks, because I'm particularly concerned about the heat island effect if we do this for 25 years and we aren't aggressive in preserving trees. We could reduce our tree canopy to our detriment.
Right. Very much an element that's a critical part of our sidewalk program, and now we have to make sure that it's implemented in a way that reflects what this council has made clear in that regard. So, okay, so I apologize, Mr. Williams, but we have to revote on item number 1.
Oh.
I hope I don't need to restate everything that's been said, but okay, we're good.
For item number 1, vote from the Budget and Finance Committee. Councilmember Paul Krikorian.
Aye.
Councilmember Englander.
Nay.
Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
Councilmember Blumenfeld.
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin.
Aye.
And for Transportation Committee, Councilmember Bonin.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
And Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
All right. It will again be the action of both committees to proceed as we've indicated. So thank you very much. And that concludes the joint part of this meeting, and we'll continue on with this meeting as Budget and Finance alone. And is there anybody here who wished to offer comment on item number 5? Okay, seeing none. Members, I propose item number 5 for consent approval. Seeing no objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve that item. Is there anybody wishing to offer comment on items 2, 3, or 4? Mr. President, because you already fulfilled your multiple items. So item number 4, members, we're going to be continuing at the request of the city attorney. So item number 2 and 3, there's no comment. Public comment on those matters is closed. And then if there's no further actually, item number 6. Is there anyone wishing to comment on item number 6? Seeing none, it will actually, that's actually an item I would propose for consent approval as well. So if there's no objection to approving item number 6 on consent, that will be the action of the committee.
Oh, 6, I'm sorry. I wanted to speak on 6 first.
Oh, you wanted to speak on 6?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and call item number 6 then before we go into closed session.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I think this is more of a conversation for all of us as this is coming down the pipe. So in 2015, we passed, as you all were a part of that, and I appreciate it. A lot of work went into that with a lot of different folks, was the earthquake retrofit, particularly on soft story pre-1978 buildings. And as we saw with the Northridge earthquake, what happened to Northridge Meadows when that collapsed. And so we put out a mandatory and mandated retrofit to all of these owners to fix their structures in a certain amount of time. We're talking about thousands of these. I would also suggest that These properties are our most vulnerable properties that we have in stock in LA. Because that's why we made the move to retrofit them, and got support from Assemblyman Adrian Nazarian, who really helped push it through in Sacramento to give us the tools to do that here. So one of the things I found that we're running into is that there is no funding available, and a lot of these property owners can't get funds, can't get loans, anywhere from a minimum, depending on the structure, of 50 to 150,000, and then over and above from there. And so some of these would be microloans or small loans. So what we're looking at is we have millions of dollars in different accounts, including the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It would not be to use those funds. We have many projects, that's a multi-year program, and many of those projects are not shovel-ready, as we well know. And it wouldn't have to be from that fund. We're just asking the CAO to look at and come up with a framework of what funds might be. That was just an example. But if we can get those structures retrofit, the worst thing we can do is experience a disaster that it would leave not only the most vulnerable housing we have red tagged, but those most vulnerable living in them are usually seniors and those on fixed incomes. Many of them are Section 8. Some of them are VASH and HUD housing, and everything in between. These are not luxury units for the most part. So if we can figure out a loan program similar to what we've done in other loan programs, where these property owners, many that also have deferred maintenance and other issues, can borrow to get the retrofit done now, and then we would earn, even though it would be nominal, the interest back. And by the time those funds start coming back in, we'll be shovel-ready on future projects as well. So the question, I think, back to the CAO when they report back is don't just look at the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, although that's perhaps tens of millions of dollars that are sitting there that are not necessarily readily available because we don't have the projects online. So that's maybe it's a place. Maybe there's some other places to look, or maybe it's a pool of different funds where we don't jeopardize a single project. But I think it's something really important in moving forward. And the reason I called it special, and I appreciate it was consent, because I want everybody to actually think about when this comes back, how important this is that we create some kind of program, because we put out the mandate, which I support, but we didn't give them any tools to get the funding in place to get it done. So that was it. So I appreciate it, Chair Kokorian, for allowing me the time to spell that out.
Thank you, Mr. Englander. And I think it's a really terrific idea, and I'm looking forward to getting the report back. An additional thing that perhaps should be looked at in the report is we have millions, perhaps tens of millions of stranded funds in a variety of special funds. Usually, you can't use those funds for loan programs that are outside of the scope of the specific purpose of that fund. But in this case, these would presumably be secured loans that would be secured by the equity in the property. And so it's worth checking to whether we might be able to put those funds that would otherwise not be able to be put to use for anything to use as a funding program, like for something like this. There may be special funds that are related to affordability of housing, for example, or to earthquake safety or public safety, other sorts of issues where that might be feasible. So, but regardless, even if it's general fund, I think it's an important program. Yeah, Mr. Blumenfield.
When we get the report back, just so we don't reinvent the wheel, I'd want to see how this compares with the PACE program, because the PACE program I worked on the state level does exactly this. It allows you to securitize based on the equity, not a personal equity, but the actual property, to get this kind of a loan for seismic.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So we should definitely look at the framework of PACE. PACE these don't qualify for PACE loans was the problem, but the framework that was used in that program is something that we could look at here.
Why don't
also,
they qualify for PACE?
For a number of reasons, but I've heard from the Apartment Owners Association, AGLA, and many others that they do not qualify under PACE. But there are...
Because the other thing is there may be something that we can do to get them to qualify.
Or they may not want to qualify for PACE because there's other strings or triggers. So I think maybe we need to find out if there are issues. We can look at that separately.
I guess I put that out there so that when we get the report back, the report also compares it to what they could get for PACE or why they could or couldn't get it.
Or why they wouldn't want to use PACE if they could.
Yeah, and because if there is an issue, we don't want to just reinvent the same problem if we're barking up that same tree, but with our own money.
Yeah, I've just told it, I was told it doesn't work. There's two things, I think, just to put it out there. I think these reports are of the utmost urgent. The clock's ticking to get these properties done, and we know, and I'm not putting a threat of an earthquake out there. We all know we're going to have one. But I think, and hopefully, knock on wood, this mandate kicks in before we have an earthquake, but these properties won't be retrofit. So then we're going to turn around and issue fines and fees or call them not habitable, then what? So I think we just got to figure it out.
Mr. Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Eager for the report back. Concerned about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so I think there'll be some policy decisions to think about when it comes back. For instance, if you're going to be using the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, should it be limited only to RSO or covenanted units? And if so, say we give a loan for RSO unit, want to make sure that they don't turn around and Ellis it 2 years later. There's got to be some agreement that they keep it on the rental market, or, if it's a covenanted unit, if they extend the covenant or something like that. Just kind of things to think about. I'm hoping we get to the point where we eliminate our backlog with affordable housing funds as we do with resurfacing.
All right.
So lucky.
Anything else on this? Okay. Without objection, then, it'll be the action of the committee to approve item number 6. And that brings us then to our, yes,
Pardon me,
Mr.
Mr.
Williams.
Chair, would that be as amended by the request from the council members?
Oh, yes, indeed, with regard to PACE. And Mr. Bonnett's request with regard to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as well. Okay. Anything else? So that will bring us then to our closed session. We'll proceed with item number 2. So if you are here on item
Yes, happy birthday. Nothing's birthday celebration like